Hello, everyone, and happy after the holidays. My name is Cornell Cruz Jr. I'm the Executive Director for the Community Reinvestment Alliance of Florida, and welcome to the Just Economy Podcast, the podcast where we try to bring in issues and organizations who address those issues direct to you. We're looking forward to seeing you at the conference coming up in May. The actual summit will be May 15th, place to be determined, but I should know that here in the next few weeks. So we look forward to seeing you in that. Today we have a special guest. We're bringing Debra Albo-Steiger, the CEO from the Children's Bereavement Center here in Miami-Dade. You just in Miami-Dade?
Nice.
In Dade, Miami-Dade County, South Florida in particular. I was speaking with Debra about, or listening to Debra talk, I think is a better way to put it. I was listening to Debra talking about children's bereavement and how her organization is helping South Florida youth in particular deal with bereavement. And I wanted to bring her on and talk about this. This is a very, very sensitive subject. And I wanted to bring her on to talk about this. So, Debra, welcome.
Thank you, Cornell. It's great to be here.
Oh, good. And I'm really glad to have you here. So as I do with everyone, I want to start this off with tell us a little bit about you and how you got here.
Right. So I grew up in South Florida, was in the Midwest for 10 years, came back. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, started in Chicago Public Schools. And how I ended up here is that I worked for Miami-Dade County Public Schools after returning and saw the great work that CBC, the Children's Bereavement Center, was doing. And in particular, we, at this public school system during the pandemic, we saw a lot of students who were becoming homeless because their parents were dying. And that was happening at younger and younger ages. So when I was approached about this job, I was very intrigued because I knew that the hard work they've been doing since 1999, and I wanted to open it up to make sure we were serving the entire South Florida community, and in particular, the homeless students that I was serving at the time at Miami-Dade County Public Schools. And we've done a lot of great work. So that's how I ended up here in a nutshell.
Well, thank you. I'm always intrigued about what the different nonprofits do, and when you say children and bereavement, I mean that kind of hits you. You know what I mean? Because you figure that no child should have to go through any type of bereavement or loss like that, not a child. So I was looking at your website before our podcast today, and I saw that you deal with children as young as 4.
That's correct. Unfortunately, and we all can know this just by living our lives, there's children who lose parents, siblings, friends, grandparents right from the start of life. And we find that the earlier they talk about their grief and loss, the more comfortable it is for them to learn how to grieve in a way that's positive, really. And when I say that, it's really difficult to understand how can grief be positive. But unfortunately, when you don't talk about a loved one who has died, when you don't speak about it, that child, that adult will have that almost like festering inside. So yes, we start at 4 years old and all the way up to however old people want to come through our Lift from Loss adult program.
So let's start with with your children's program. How? And I understand that every child is going to be a little bit different, but how difficult is it to get a child to actually acknowledge? Because I know as a grown man, it takes something for me to acknowledge grief. I've seen it in my military career and with my parents having passing, but I know how difficult that was as an adult. How do you actually get a child like that to process something like that?
So to be honest, the real issue is the adults around them. The kids want to talk about their loss of the loved one. The kids
Really?
Yes. A child wants to talk about mom or dad or sibling or whomever has died. Oftentimes what happens is the child is confronted by adults around them that are afraid to talk about it because they don't want to quote unquote break them. But really, that's not the issue. The issue is the child wants to say, well, I really like that restaurant. Dad used to take me there. Let's go there and eat that food. And the adult is thinking in their head, oh my gosh, it's going to make them cry. Well, it's okay if they cry. That's okay. And that's really what we try to do is explain to people whatever feelings you're having is totally okay for you. And the best thing you can do for your child is to talk to the child about that.
Okay, so it sounds like to me that we got to start with the parents.
Yes.
That's where the true issue lies, because as most children are, and I'm really going through it again with my grandchildren. They have no problem saying whatever it is that comes to their mind. You know what I mean? And they're young, and they have no problem saying, so I'm getting my mind, it's supposed to come out, right? But the parents seem to be, from what you're saying, it seems to me to be the biggest issue because we're so busy trying to protect or thinking that they can't handle it, right?
Exactly. And so losing a loved one, especially a parent or a sibling, is actually considered an ACE, an adverse childhood experience. Childhood and loss is a huge childhood ACE. You want to make sure that people and parents in particular know that the child should be talking about that loss, and they have to also be talking about the loss. It's very important. When we started in 1999, we started as only a child organization, hence the name Children's Bereavement Center. But shortly thereafter, our two founders realized it was very important to have the parent component. So we have a full family model, meaning that if a child is coming to groups, we ask that the parent goes to their own group because the parent needs to process the loss. Now, what I just said is true. The parent oftentimes doesn't want to because they're afraid of their own feelings of loss and that they're going to cry in front of people. So what we say is go to the group for the person, the child in your life, right? They realize after going to a few groups that they're actually really going for themselves too.
Okay, so wait a minute. Let me get this straight. So when they come in, do you actually separate the parents and the children into different groups, and the adults attend a group on their own and the children attend a group on their own?
Correct.
Really?
Yes. So they don't attend groups together. We do a lot of joint events together. We just had one with partners in Broward County at the Canine Assisted Therapy Program. Now that one, we had the parents and kids come together. Those are events we do throughout the three counties. We'll call them Connect and Remember Together events. And that we encourage people to come and reflect together. The issue with groups, and this is any type of group, so if you go to an AA group or you go to an HOMY group, which is mental health, AA is Alcoholics Anonymous, of course, then it's really good to go with others who are going through that. That's why it's peer support. It's not therapy. And so when a child is going with other children, they're way more likely to be open than if they're talking in front of their parents. They don't want to hurt their parent either, right? So if the parent is there in the group, they're not going to be totally honest.
So it sounds like you're saying there's just as much caring going on both sides.
100%.
Right? The kids are caring. They don't want their parents to hurt. The parents don't want the kids to hurt. But the kids are, as with anything, more adaptable than the parents, correct?
Oh, I to an extent. I think as adults, over time, we just grow our own protections, right? And so over time, with our protections, we tend to go inward. And we think, not just for kids, but, oh, well, the people around me don't want to see me cry. I'm going to protect them. So kids still start to sense that at a very young age, and we need to make sure that they know it's okay to talk about their feelings.
So you mentioned that you started in 1999. How can I put this? How do you meet your clients?
It's a great question. And that was an issue that I was facing in the school system. Again, I was working with a population that was displaced from their homes. And I speak about Maslow's needs of hierarchy a lot. And they often spoke about their need for housing, food, and shelter. Clearly, that's the most important thing in their lives. And I agreed with that. And I would even get into the weeds. I would call it boots to the ground social work because that's what I do. That's what I was doing. The issue, though, is that the clients, the students, the parents really needed to talk about grief and loss. And so after they were settled, I would encourage them to come to groups. However, it was really hard to say, and at the time, this was before the pandemic, when my staff and I would refer, we were in 9 sites in 3 counties. The majority of the sites were in very affluent private schools. And it was wonderful. They had in-kind space. It was very hard, though, for my students from Booker T Senior High or for Homestead Senior High. If I said, okay, you're going to go over to this private school and you're going to talk about all your feelings, it was like asking them to walk to the moon. And so what I did when I came on board with my board and my staff is we started doing more in-person events in the community. So one of the very exciting things about 2025 is we will be moving into the Children's Village at Lotus House in Overtown. And why I bring that up is that we will be physically in the community so people will see us, not just for groups, but they'll see us, and this happens already, at community activities, back to school events, health fairs, holiday events. And why that's important is that it really should be something people get used to. They want to be used to seeing us in the community. It's not something that they step back and think, oh, I don't want to talk to that lady. She's about death. No, you want to talk to us all the time because the truth is we all are human, and it's the one great equalizer is death.
This is true no matter what your income bracket is. That is the great equalizer, I would think, if nothing else. All right. So it's very interesting that I'm going to be seeing you at these different events now, including after school projects and new school year things and those things that are happening. So, since you say you're going to be starting this in 2025, I'm interested. What do you think the reaction's going to be?
So far it's been great.
Okay.
We're joining 11 other organizations in the Children's Village. So what's wonderful about that, some of them are partners we've been working with, and some are new partners. And I'll give an example. So Arts for Learning will be moving in as well. We decided once we learned that we were moving in together, we embarked on a journey, and we decided to do something a little bit different than groups. So they're in the after school program business, and we went to one of their schools and we worked on curriculum for just a short period of time. It wasn't groups, it was open to anybody, although it turned out that every single kid in the class ended up having a loss, which isn't surprising after all of these years of the pandemic and everything that's followed. So we went to this, and essentially it was, let's talk about your feelings and how to cope with hard feelings. And what we found from Arts for Learning is it was such a success. The pilot last year, we're repeating it. So I think our moving into the Children's Village will be very welcome. And I'm not going to stop there. My goal is to actually move into in-kind partners throughout the 3 counties. And I'm hoping Homestead, and then in Broward and Palm Beach as well.
Understand. So you mentioned something that you did something with Canine, with the Canine organization that we both know. Well, I'm interested. What was that about?
Well, it started actually because of our partnership through the Nonprofit Executive Alliance. I met Monica, the executive director, and through Jim Moran Institute, where we both had gone through the leadership program, and we started to speak. And I said, this is too good of a relationship not to build upon. So her organization.
Monica is great.
Monica's amazing, and Canine Assisted Therapy is amazing. And so what we did is we came together and we said, what can we do to encourage the dogs and their handlers to come out with our folks? And what was great is it's not just our participants that came out. It was participants, but what I found very interesting, and I'm getting chills speaking about it, this was just 2 weeks ago, was that there were individuals that came that had never been to a group. Why? Because going to your first group is really hard. Even picking up the phone to call. There was a mom and dad who had lost their adult child several years before. And she said, I follow every one of your newsletters and your events. I haven't been able to work up the strength to go to groups, but I love dogs. And I saw this event and I just thought, what the heck, I'm going to come. She went from Miami to Oakland Park, and it was their first event. And she said, I don't know if I'm ready for groups yet, but I'm ready for these types of events. So that's how Monica and I came up with it. The Broward Community Foundation supported us and gave us funding to have the event. And it was absolutely beautiful.
That's great. That's really great to hear. You touched on it seems like every time you answer a question, you touch on another subject that takes me somewhere else, which is a good thing. You touched on getting the folks to come to groups. Is it something psychological with us as people that when we go through something like that, it's hard to go to, whether it's AA or bereavement or whatever the case may be, it's difficult for us to come together in a group? Is that just a psychological thing due to the human being?
I think it comes back. It's a great question. I think it comes back to protective factors in our lives, and we're trying to protect ourselves. And what people don't realize, I'm a therapist by training. That's my background. And what people don't realize, by talking about your feelings, it is much, much healthier for you than holding them inside. And saying I'm going to go to a grief support group makes you very vulnerable, because you're going to be around strangers who've also had a loss, but that means that you have to be vulnerable. And not everybody is in a position to do that. And I don't expect everyone to do that. So what we explain to people is that our groups are therapeutic. They're not therapy. So what that means, and as a therapist, I know when you go to therapy, you're expected to talk. You can't sit in a therapy, even a therapeutic group, for an hour and not say one word. In our groups, you can introduce yourself, say why you're there, not say one more word. So, hi, my name is Deb. I'm here to remember my dad, Jimmy, who died last September, and that's why I'm here today. And if I don't feel comfortable saying one other word, I can listen, and that in itself is very therapeutic.
So is there ever a protocol? And I'm asking this question because I've had folks, and even myself, that have had loss, and I noticed that some people actually believe there's a certain time frame that they must grieve and then get back out into the world. And I'm a firm believer that everybody's different. Everybody handles it different, and that's just me. But I would love to hear from a professional. Is there a protocol for when your grieving should end, or when you should address it? Probably a better question is when you should address it.
Thank you for answering that question. The answer is a wholehearted no. There's no magic number. There's no magic year that it's going to fix itself. And this is so important because back in the 50 plus years ago, Dr. Kubler-Ross came up with the quote unquote stages of grief. What people don't realize, though, was that was about your own death, your own mortality. It had nothing to do with the people around you. And what's
really?
happened, yes.
I've always misread it then myself.
Everybody has. And what happens, and we're very clear to this about our participants, there are no stages of grief when it comes to other people. And this is really important because people will come to groups, and they'll come into a group, and our groups are an hour and a half for adults, an hour for the younger kids. And they'll say, in an hour, I have felt angry, in denial, acceptance, and back again in the same hour. And we say, that's fine. That's completely fine. That's just what you're going through. Because if you start to label it and say, well, I've already gone through denial, so that means I have to be over it. But then you feel like you're in denial again. I'm going backwards. There's no such thing in grief. That is just the process. You're a human being. And by the way, I could be grieving one person now and another person 5 years from now, and that process will be totally different too.
It's interesting that you say that. I think we as people put too much pressure on ourselves and we've misread the 4 stages of grief, because I know you have just educated me, because I know I've misread it. I think that we've put these time limits on ourselves and thinking, okay, I gotta get back up, in 3 months or so, or depending on how close the person was to us. You got to get back up in 3 months, or you got to get back up in a month and get back out there, whatever the case may be. And I think we've self-pressurized. We put that pressure on ourselves because we've misread the 4 stages of grief. I'm amazed at that. I just learned something. Thank you.
It's huge. And it really, and I think as at least I'll say for Americans, we do put a lot of pressures on ourselves to get A's and B's and do good grades and do well in life. And that's not the way it works with grief. There is no doing well with grief. And that's, I believe, why our groups are so impactful. I did lose my dad a year ago, September 29th, 2023, very suddenly to a heart attack. And so challenging to have gone through that and running this organization. But what I've realized, and we're always in our places for a reason, right? And I know that the day that he died, my husband said, I think you are in your position for a reason, because it made me realize how much support I had around me. And going to groups after that, I got it. And I said, wow, I can go to a group the day after he died, 5 years after he died, 10 years after he died, and go in and talk about him, and everyone there understands you. That's not the way life is, right? So in every different religion, there's different traditions. So after a loss, there's usually some period of a week, a shiva, whatever it is, to really memorialize that person. But after a week, a month, definitely 3 months, everyone around you isn't calling you every day to check in how you're doing, but you're still feeling that. You go to a group, no matter when that is, the beauty of it, the person's going to understand you, the people around you, and that's why our groups are just so impactful.
This is a very interesting subject, and I'm glad that we're having this discussion today, because we all have to deal with it sooner or later, in one way, shape, form, or fashion. We all have to deal with it, and deal with bereavement and how to come back from it, and being able to address it. I think is key. For me, it was easier, and I don't know why, but it was easier for me to address it with my mom than it was for me to address it with my dad. Do you find that the how you address bereavement not being equal? Because I really felt bad about it. You know what I mean? I really felt, okay, I should be mourning my mom more than I mourn my dad, but I didn't. You know what I mean? So is that is the inequity? Is that common?
Absolutely. There are often times where people will say that my dog just died and I am crying more for the loss of my dog than I did for my parents. And what's wrong with me? Nothing is wrong with you. Nothing at all. There's just different moments in time. There's different experiences that you're having. There's just different abilities to be able to grieve at that moment, and it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't lessen your love for that person or that animal. It's just the way that you feel, and that's okay. And it's so important for people not to judge themselves, and you definitely shouldn't, Cornell. It is completely fine, because I know you love your mom, and I know you loved your dad, and that love, by the way, still is here. That's very important about the work we do, is that love does not stop. The memories of that person does not stop, and especially around the holidays, it is so important to keep those memories alive.
So it sounds like in sometimes in some way, shape, form, or fashion, I know it's free form. We get to think for ourselves as far as bereavement is concerned, but maybe you also need to learn how to grieve. Maybe do you think we need to learn how to grieve?
I think our groups help people learn how to grieve. They in the sense that you're not learning anything. It's just you're realizing what's okay for yourself, and you're giving yourself.
That's the way I should have put it. What's
permission.
Okay for us?
You want to have permission, right? Like, we all need to be kinder to ourselves. That's 100% true.
Mm.
None of us are kind enough to ourselves. We're usually a lot nicer to other people. And so you go to a group and you see someone, and this is the beauty of our group. So we don't have a limit, meaning somebody can come the day after a loss or 10 years after a loss. They can come every week, or they can come once and then come back a month from now. Maybe it's the person's death anniversary and they need to be with others. And they can come to more than one group a week. It's always free, and we don't question them when they come or go. Why is that important? Well, it's important because we don't want anyone to, again, go back to questioning themselves, like, oh gosh, I have to go 3 days a week. What's wrong with me? Nothing's wrong with you. You're just going and you're learning. Each group is different. Each night is different. How you're feeling is different. So you're just really giving yourself permission to feel. And if I see somebody else grieving a loss who had a recent loss, and it's been maybe 6 months or a year and 6 months for me, then I'm realizing, wow, I'm so different than I was a year ago. And that's really helpful for you to know how different you've become on your grief journey.
It's important that we know about these organizations within our community that are doing this great work and helping. It just goes to show you how important the nonprofit world is in our different communities. I like to tell the story. When I retired from the military, the only thing I knew about as far as the nonprofit world was American Red Cross and Army Emergency Relief. I didn't know about all the entities that are out here doing all this great work out here in the community. So, and that's why we got to have these conversations and talk about the great things that the organizations are doing. And we're gonna do our contact information for the Children's Bereavement Center at the end. But one more thing before I want to move on to your training opportunities is I noticed on your website you deal with 4 different blocks of folks. You deal with children, you deal with young adults, teens, and I should have said teens, then young adults, and then adults. So is each program you deal differently, or do they run parallel?
They're all a little bit different depending on the population. So when we first started, we focused the kids on only having the art and music therapist. We've actually found for the teens, especially the teens also, but the young adults and adults, they also like the art and music therapist.
Okay, now you got to expand. You got to expound on the art and music.
So this is incredible. So we hire art and music therapists to come to our groups. Again, it started with kids and then with teens, and we realized that the adults really appreciated them. So a music therapist is someone who is trained, obviously, who's a musician. Typically in our groups, it's the piano. It's the guitar, but they do play piano as well. They play other instruments, and they come to groups and they're singing songs. The most famous one for grief support groups is Lean on Me. So that's a big one. But
I would think
that's a big one. But Recuérdame or Remember Me from Coco, which is a beautiful movie about loss, for example, we sing that one a lot. And actually, I'm sure nobody's surprised, but Disney movies often are about loss, and it actually is helpful for kids and adults to hear those different songs as they remember loved ones. So the music therapist comes in, we sing along. We just had our candle lighting, which is what we do is we have the music therapist come and sing while we're holding candles for our loved one and remembering them. So that's part for the music therapist. The art therapist is really fun. What the art therapists do is they will come to groups and they will start with piece of paper and a pencil. That's all it is. And I have 0 drawing abilities. And they always say you don't need any drawing abilities. And they'll tell you line by line how to draw. And they'll draw a vessel or a tree or something that ultimately ends up helping you remember your loved one. And it's not just me because I hear the participants say it. I keep it next to my desk, and then I remember my dad in its wonderful ways. So that's like the only difference is the amount of time the art and music therapists are coming. Otherwise, our groups are very open. Again, this is not therapy. We have 2 facilitators that run groups. It's a therapist, a licensed therapist, and then somebody who is trained through our training program as a volunteer, who's often has experienced a loss. And they're there just to listen. They're not trying to run the group. If somebody is overpowering the group, they'll kind of turn it around. They're trained on how to say, okay, so-and-so, that's wonderful. Does anyone else have that experience? And that way, one person's not dominating. But the groups themselves are very similar. You start, you say, like I did before, what the intro is, what your name, who you're there to remember. Maybe answer a question, and then that sparks conversation amongst the peers. And that's the same. And then at the end, you have like a closing statement. So that's pretty much the same structure.
Is there any, since you have 4 tracks, I'll call them tracks, is there any mixing of the tracks at all, or you try to keep it uniform?
The only tracks, it's interesting, we haven't said that way, but you're right, they're different tracks. So the adults are the only ones, everyone is a general loss group, meaning it can be a parent, a sibling, a child, a coach, a teacher, a friend. And that's another way that we're different. There's some groups that only limit to a very immediate family member. We are not like that. We do have 2 specific groups that are more in line with a particular loss. So we have a group for moms and dads who've experienced a loss during pregnancy or the first year of life. Very significant loss. We have that group in English and Spanish, and we have another group for moms and dads who've experienced the loss of a child of any age. Again, a very specific group. So those, and that's in English and Spanish. And then our general adult groups are in English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. The overlap is there are some people who will choose to go to the group for who's lost a child, and also choose to go to the general loss group. So that's the overlap.
So, again, before I get to your training opportunities, I got to ask this question. I got a really good friend of mine, and she's a licensed clinical social worker as well, and her specialty is dealing with folks with grief. So how do you separate it? And I got to go back to when I was in the military and I was on drill sergeant duty. It was really hard for me to leave drill sergeant duty at the office and come home at night and not think about, okay, maybe this would have been different, that would have been different. Maybe I should have done this differently. And my whole first year, every time I had to send a kid home, every time I had to send a person who couldn't make it, I took it really personally, right? So how do you guys separate the two? How do you, as people, as human beings who feel, how do you separate? How do you not leave? How do you not take that, especially dealing with grief? How do you not take that home with you? I ask every social worker I know, I ask the same question, but I'm always interested in the different ways of dealing with it.
It's a great question. And what we do, there's something special that was started 25 years ago by our 2 founders. And what that is called, we call it supervision, but really it's a debrief. So after each group, we do debrief with our facilitators. And in that time, the facilitators are able to talk to each other with what we call a group coordinator. And that group coordinator is able to talk to them about anything, especially if they had a trigger themselves. So a lot of our facilitators have had losses, to talk through it, and you're leaving it there during that group processing time. And that helps quite a bit. With our leadership team, you're right. I mean, it happens all the time. You have some horrible stories. People call me. We also take opportunities in our own leadership time. Every week we have a meeting and we talk during that meeting.
I was going to ask that question.
Yes, we make sure to talk to each other. So about half of our staff are licensed mental health professionals like myself. Mm-hmm. And even those who aren't, it's a heavy toll. And so we need to talk to each other.
Good. I'm glad to hear you say that, because I always wondered, because, granted, what I did, especially as far as drill sergeant duty, was not nearly as important as that, but I just knew I couldn't turn it off. You know what I mean? And I wrestled with that. I was on status for 3 years, and I wrestled with that. So I noticed that you also have training opportunities. So let's talk a little bit about your training opportunities.
We're very excited about that. And this really began because when I was being onboarded as the CEO, I was leaving the Miami-Dade County Public Schools, but I also was practicing for over 20 years. And
before you left the school system?
Before I left the school system, I thought, not that I knew clearly I didn't know everything, but when I was being onboarded by our clinical director and he was going through the training, I said, I didn't know any of this stuff. Nobody taught me For example, and this is to me the most important, is that people will often say, and in the military you'll hear this too, oh, they committed suicide. It's actually a really dangerous thing to have the family members hear that, because you commit a crime, right? Like when you commit something, you're doing something wrong. Suicide, you don't want the family member saying that. You want to say they died by suicide or they suicided. And so it's really important that people go through this training. Once I went through the training, I said, I can't believe after my master's and 20 years of doing continuing education, I never knew this. And I was working in Chicago, in the Chicago public schools, in a community that was largely gang involved, and working with death probably more than my peers who were in geriatrics. And I didn't know any of this. So I didn't want this to be a secret anymore. So we have fortunately received several grants that offers different groups, but for example, mental health professionals in the entire state of Florida. We offer in South Florida specifically any nonprofit professional in Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach counties that are interested in coming. And it's a 4-part series, and you talk about grief. The first one, and this is the one I'm asked all the time, Cornell, is what do I say to someone after a loss? What's appropriate? And we talk about that in session 1. Such an important topic. And it's really, again, about being a human being. And whether you're a supervisor or a teacher or a therapist, we all need to know how to talk to each other. We'd be a better community if we were all grief informed.
Yeah, well, words matter. And especially in this country, I haven't traveled a lot throughout the world. In this country, tone is a big deal. A huge deal. You can say a lot of different things, a lot of different ways. That the tone in which you say it dictates how somebody takes it, right? So it's interesting that you've nailed this down to how we talk to each other, what how important the words and the way in which we use those words are important to someone who's just, especially someone who's just had a loss, who just suffered a loss. I think we all have the standard, our prayers and that kind of stuff. We all have those standards. I think that that phrase has been way overused, and I think people are look at that as a negative these days. Especially since we've had so many school shootings and all that good stuff. So I think that that's changed the way we look at it a lot. So when we have national events like a school shooting, do you find that affects your groups in their own bereavement as well?
It definitely could. We have people who are coming in groups who are the victims' family members from mass shootings, and we were very involved in Parkland in 2018 after Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. Yes. So we certainly see that when things are happening in the world, it does impact our groups, but ultimately the person at the group really just wants to talk about their loved one. And so it can trigger, it certainly can. And we see maybe sometimes an increase in attendance those weeks when something is in the news.
So you talked about your training opportunities. I would love to understand is how can we as a community, how can we get involved?
Well, the easiest way to get involved is to do what you did this morning, is to go on our website, childbereavement.org or liftfromloss.org, either way. People tend to spell bereavement wrong, so liftfromloss.org is a lot easier. And, peruse through it and see how to get involved. We have a lot of volunteer opportunities. We just had our biggest programming event of the year at Zoo Miami on November 23rd. The next one's already set for November 15th, 2025, Zoo Miami. We call it Steps for Healing. And our participants come out, our facilitators, our board members, our staff, and community partners come out. It's a beautiful day at the zoo. We have a memorial wall that the students at the Design and Architecture Senior High create every year for us. People write notes to their loved ones. We have our nonprofit partners, a lot of them come out to not just give information, but to actually do activities with the kids. And it is a beautiful day to just come together. That's the whole point of what we do, is we don't want anyone to grieve alone. We don't want anyone to do anything alone. And when you come together for our different events, and if you're a volunteer, that always helps because we need more opportunities for that. We have volunteer facilitators as well. That's a bit more of a commitment. Not everybody can facilitate every week. And I do want to mention what we've done since 2020 is we have offered an online option. We will always have an online option. Why that is the case, and I didn't mention this either, I used to be a facilitator when I first started as CEO. I was a group facilitator for the first year, and it was such a meaningful experience. And what I heard from people at the time is, please don't stop offering the groups online, because I am on my second job since my husband died, and I'm on break, and the only way I can do this is if I can hop into a Zoom room.
Really glad you mentioned that, because I was going to bring that up. Do you offer online participation? So I think what's so important about this is that the volunteer opportunities that you may have, you never know. I know loss is loss. Everybody deals with it differently, but you never know when what your loss has in common with someone else's, and how you can help them get through that. And the Children's Bereavement Center, don't be fooled by the name Children's, right? They deal with the whole segment of society, or the community rather. But it's important that you volunteer your services. You never know what the good that you could do just by talking to someone. And I'm glad that you guys offer these volunteer services. So is there anything else you'd like to say about the Children's Center?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that to definitely look us up on our website. And if somebody needs, obviously, if somebody needs to go to a group, you can easily fill out the form online. Mm-hmm. We will call you. Again, we have services in English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. I will mention, too, in case you have a national following, since the pandemic, because we offer online, we actually do get people outside of South Florida who call in. This was particularly interesting after the Surfside building collapsed back in 2021, because so many of the individuals that were impacted were in other states, or really other countries, and people from other countries and states have joined our groups as well. And again, we're free. We don't ask for insurance. Being a nonprofit, this is our mission is to offer this for free. And so we encourage people to tell other people. And if it's too heavy, that's okay. You can always have them call us, and our intake coordinators are the kindest people. We have intake coordinators who speak English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole, and they'll speak to whomever about our services.
See, this is one of the things why it's so important. I know this may be, especially around the holidays, this is something that people don't want to think about. But I think about my mother and father, especially around the holidays, because I know what we used to do as a family during the holidays. And my father came from a huge family. My father had 18 brothers and sisters, 18. And so we had a lot going on in our family. And even though I was an only child, we had a lot. So, but I know how it was, I love to think about them constantly, around the holidays. And while it may be, this is something that we truly have to deal with. We have a lot going on around the holidays. In particular, we suffer quite a bit of loss. So having an organization like this that's available to you, I think is highly important. Please don't fail to reach out. Volunteer if you can volunteer. And Deborah, if you give us your contact information, please.
Sure. So I always tell people you can email me at Debra@childbereavement.org, or certainly you can go on our website. I encourage people to do that because the website has a lot of information. And so if you wanted to reach out for training, there's one form for that. Again, www.childbereavement.org. It's so important to do that. And then if not, you're going to go ahead and you're going to find the group information also. But emailing me is best. I often have my phone off, as I do right now, because I'm in a lot of meetings. But Debra@childbereavement.org is the fastest way to get me.
Well, thank you, Deborah, but we're not done yet. I have one final question.
Okay.
And this is the question I ask everyone.
Okay.
If you've looked at our podcast, I ask everybody the same question at the end. If I gave you all the power in the world, what would you change?
I would have people speak openly about their feelings. And I know that's probably something that nobody else would say, but being a therapist.
That is a new one.
Being a therapist for as long as I've been a therapist, and being a mom for as long as I've been a mom, there is something that if you open your heart to others and you share openly about your own feelings, it changes the world. And so if I had a magic wand to help people really unlock whatever is holding them back for being truly honest with themselves and others, again, our community would be a much different and much more beautiful place.
Okay, you heard it from Deborah. I think that I agree with you. I think we hold back a lot, but we can also do this respectfully. We don't have to be disrespectful. As I stated earlier, when we, people hear tone first before they actually hear the words in this country. So, and I say that from a place of going to other countries and seeing that it's different. And in our country, we have a tendency to hear the tone of what you said before what you said, but being able to exhibit those feelings and be able to express those feelings with respect, I think is a cool thing. And Debra, thank you so much for that great message. That's the first time anybody's ever answered that question that way. So thank you so much for today. We welcome Debra Albo-Steiger, CEO of Children's Bereavement Center. We were so glad to sit and talk with her and talk about bereavement. Talk about our feelings and talk about how we come back from our sudden loss. Thank you again. This has been the Just Economy Podcast, sponsored by the Community Reinvestment Alliance of Florida. I'm your host, Cornell Cruz Jr., the Executive Director, and we look forward to seeing you next time.